Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our recorded sessions of the Intuitive Eating class. My name is Brittany,
And I'm Kirsten.
and we're your intuitive eating class facilitators as you've gotten to know us over the course of this class. Before diving into today's topic, we want to encourage you to take some time to reflect on your past week. So last week, we discussed many things, including honoring your fullness. We challenged you to try to eat a bit more mindfully and to be aware of your bodily sensations when eating. We recognize that this is the hardest part of intuitive eating, the implementation, right? It is so hard. We can talk
Mhm.
about it all we want, but when it comes to implementation, we start noticing those roadblocks or those bumps that we didn't necessarily recognize. And it's hard. It's hard to get moving past those. So please be mindful of those. And we're here to work through those with you. Trusting ourselves, although seems like a nice idea, it can be difficult to do if we haven't allowed ourselves that trust in a while. And now I say difficult, but it is not impossible, which is why we will be discussing coping with your emotions today. So, today is the day, folks. The day to be
Mhm.
gentle and compassionate towards yourself and how you use food to cope and letting go of guilt, right? This guilt follows along with us, I feel like, for many situations in our life, especially tied to food, like a dark shadow looming behind us, right? And we want to let that go. And so today I'm encouraging you to do that. So let's talk about coping with our emotions. This looks and comes in many forms throughout our lives. We have learned to cope with various things in various ways, and food is simply being one of those ways to cope. Whether we've noticed that and recognized it or not, right? If you're listening and you're like, oh, I don't do that, maybe take a second and take a step back. Is that truly the case or is it not? And either way, that's fine. But it is one of those forms that we've learned to cope. So our goal for you by the end of this recording, and as you become an intuitive eater and implement this throughout your everyday life, is to shed that guilt around emotional eating and humanize the experience.
Oh, I love that. Humanize the experience, right? Sometimes we like to think that we are somehow this all powerful entity and we can just whatever, right? But emotional eating is such a real thing and it's okay and everyone struggles with it, right? We are not alone. And the hard thing is that our diet culture really villainizes emotional eating, right? Like we like to say that it's the worst thing ever, which reinforces another round of food restrictions and rules and food scripts. And just like how the book says, regardless of your size, your shape, where you are from, or where you're born, food usually has emotional associations. And if you have any doubt about this statement, I want you to look around you, right? Pick up that phone, look at social media, look at TV commercials, look at the billboards that surround our roads. And they push this idea, right? There's food on almost every single billboard you see. And it's not usually through our stomachs, but through this idea of emotional connection, right? In those 30 to 60 seconds of your commercial being watched or you scrolling through social media or whatever, um, think about the romance that has the ability to be captured in that cup of coffee. Or I think of, I've seen a banking commercial, right, that even has a coffee shop inside of their bank. Like we're going to we're going to combine our two hardest things, right? Food and finances, and we're going to blend them and marry them together. And now everything in the world is a-okay because you can have coffee while discussing your financial problems. And we everything revolves around food. Think about even the way we think when we have someone in our lives that needs something, right? Usually, I don't know about you, but my go-to is, oh, someone had a baby, I'm going to bring them a meal. Or someone's having a hard time, I'm going to bring them a plate of brownies or cookies. Or we bake this some kind of amazing meal and right, we're creating happiness for someone. And so our emotions are just so intricately woven into our eating experience. And just like in the book, I love when Evelyn states food is love, love is comfort, or food is comfort, food is reward, food is a reliable friend. And I think this is so important to remember, especially considering how emotionally charged food is and it's sold all around us. It's no surprise that it evolves, right, into a coping mechanism.
I also think too, as you were saying that quote, food is love, food is comfort, food is reward, and food is a reliable friend. It brings us back to this perspective of food is not the enemy here. I think diet
No,
culture and all of this guilt makes it seem like food is the enemy, right? It's something to be fought, it's a
food is the
daily battle.
problem.
Yeah, it's a daily
Mhm,
battle to be had, right? And it's not. Just like that
mm-mm.
quote says, is there's so much happiness, there's so much bonding, right? We break bread together and create friendships, lasting friendships, or you know,
Yes.
you think of like Thanksgiving feast, right? Where you sit down with all of your loved ones and you talk and share stories about this last year and talk about gratitude and all these things. It is food is not the enemy, right? There's so
No.
many great and joyous occasions to be had when food is involved. And so that's what we're talking about today. So,
And also, I think, Brittany, on that topic too, right? We use food in sad ways, right? Like, I think
mm,
about my breakups in college and high school, right? And like the girlfriends that would surround me with, Ben and Jerry's ice cream, and you would sit and you would mope and you would cry. And we used food as a form of comfort. Or when you were having a hard day and mom baked cookies, right? We used food as a form of comfort. So like you said, right, there's these emotions that surround food, and diet culture would have us believe that we need to take emotions out of eating.
right.
But I think when we go back to, right, when we talked about discovering that satisfaction factor, part of enjoying our food is putting emotions into our food, right? It's not just about how it tastes, it's about the people that's surrounding us as we're eating. It's about what's happening at the dinner table and what's happening in our lives. And so emotions are very much connected to our food.
Yeah. And what we're going to be continuing to talk about is recognizing that emotion that is tied
Mhm.
into it. So, Kirsten, my question for you is this emotional tie between food good or bad? We've basically answered this, but I want you to tell me again for those in the
Yes.
back, is it good or bad?
It is neutral, right? Morality does not need to be placed on the fact that we link emotions and food together. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just something to be aware of. It's something to
Mhm.
know about. Because often we are eating to try to soothe or cope with an emotion that we may be feeling subconsciously, right? We may not even be aware of why we're craving a particular type of food. And that's why it's so important that as we continue throughout our intuitive eating journey, we get curious, right? And we've said that so many times throughout the class that really the reason why intuitive eating works is because it allows you to get curious about the reasons we're eating and what the
Mhm.
desire is. And when we ask ourselves if we're hungry, right, that's the first step. Are we hungry? And then many times when food begins to enter our thoughts, we're in this beginning stages of hunger, but also sometimes we're not, right? Sometimes we're not hungry. Sometimes we need to turn inward and listen to what other cues are going on in our body. Why are we thinking about that food? If we're not hungry, but food is still in our thoughts, this is where I invite you to get curious and question why you're thinking about it. and where we can begin to recognize just how intertwined our emotions are with food. Let me give you a personal example. So, a few years ago, when I was starting my intuitive eating journey, I started recognizing that every day at about 12 o'clock, so right around lunchtime,
Mm-hmm.
I would start to crave hot chocolate. And just so we're clear, to this day, this is, I say it's like in the past. It's still current. This is a
Right,
hard
right.
fast. We're still
We know
going
this.
strong.
Yes.
12 p.m., Kirsten starts to crave hot chocolate. But I wasn't hungry, right? I was on the beginning of my intuitive eating journey. So I was trying to really listen to my internal cues. And I was recognizing that I wasn't hungry. I wasn't thirsty. I always have my emotional support cup with me. So I am not a person that
Right.
usually gets thirsty very often. But I could not stop thinking about hot chocolate. And so every day, right before nap time, I had three little boys at the time. I had a 3, 2, and 1 year old. I would heat up my milk, and while it was warming up in the microwave, I'd go and lay my kiddos down for a nap. Back in the good old days where I could just put them in their beds and shut the door, and you know, that was it. And then I would go downstairs and I would stir in some thick, rich Starbucks hot chocolate, and I'd top it off with my homemade whipped cream and a drizzle of dark chocolate syrup.
Mm-hmm.
And I would sit down on the couch. I'd turn on Grey's Anatomy. That's still my show of choice, unfortunately. And I would drink it. And I would feel so calm and relieved. Can you see it?
Yep,
Can you
I
see
can.
why I was
I'm
craving the
there
hot
with you.
chocolate?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to be there with me? It was the fact that for the past 6 hours, right? It was noon. I had been awake for 6 hours with my three boys. I was exhausted. I was overwhelmed. I was stressed. And I was using that hot chocolate as a way to cope with all of that anxiety and stress. And it was a way to like lay them down and give myself a breather. And I had to decide in that moment, right? I had to, and I recognized, oh, I'm not craving this for any kind of hunger cue. I'm craving it for an emotional reason. Is that bad? And I really struggled with this. I was still right trying to beat out diet culture. Um, and I personally decided no, no, it was not. I am still a stressed out, touched out mom to not just three wild little boys now. I now have a fourth one that I throw in that mix. And I still, especially with my newborn at home, come 12 o'clock, I don't even have kids that nap anymore. I crave that hot chocolate. But because I understand the emotions of it, because I understand that I wanted a way to comfort myself, congratulate myself for making it halfway through the day. And that's what I wanted the hot chocolate for. Now I get to choice, right? And we're going to talk about that. We're going to lean into what recognizing our emotions mean. Um, but first, let's talk about some other emotions people use food to cope. So, Brittany, take it away. What are some of those other emotions we use food to cope with? And is it bad? Right? I know I just answered it, but let's answer it again and again to help it drill into our brains.
Yeah, let's do it. So we created a handout and handed this out in the beginning of your very first class and said that you're going to need to use and see this again. And so I'm going to ask you, find that piece of paper or put a pause and look this up. The emotional eating continuum. So again, this is one of the handouts that was given to you at the very first class. And as we may have experienced or seen that food can be used to cope with feelings in several different ways for several different emotions, right? Let me first be very clear and separate something. Using food to cope is not a component of biological hunger. We have really been talking about biological hunger and that biological cue, right, up until this point. Um, but we what I am talking about is that emotional hunger, right? That emotional hunger to seek connection, to seek satisfaction, to feel comfort, to have sensory gratification, right? Maybe we're feeling like we need a little something salty, something sweet. Maybe we're looking for distraction. And then on the end of the emotional eating continuum, there's things like sedation and punishment. These are emotional hunger items. And this emotional hunger can be triggered by many different things throughout our day, situations that we find ourselves in. Perhaps it's a feeling of being bored or uncomfortable, or something else that triggered perhaps a small nibble to an all out of control binge, where our intuitive easer voices that we've talked about are nowhere to be found, right? I think when we find ourselves in these situations where we've just allowed that emotional hunger to take that driver's seat, right? They've got one hand firmly on the steering wheel and they're just going to town, right? Where all of the other pieces of intuitive eating just are, hey, sit in the passenger seat or you're kicked to the back row. So let's talk about sensory gratification. So this can be sensory gratification or AKA pleasing your palate, I feel like is a little bit easier to understand. So like a sweet or salty craving or a normal and natural part of living and vital to our intuitive eating, which again is AKA discovering satisfaction, right? Is noticing, hey, I'm feeling a little something sweet after that savory food, right? This is again something that's very normal and natural. Like sitting down perhaps at a special holiday celebration, what I just talked about, Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah.
Maybe you aren't hungry, um, and ready to eat a full-on meal, but you're interested in trying some different flavors. Or you think that something looks particularly good or smells really good. And you've got these wonderful foods available to you and you want to try them again without restriction. That is a-okay, right? That's sensory
Yep.
gratification at its finest. So when we're talking about coping in food, we do need to address that if food is the first and only thing that comes to your mind when taking care of yourself and trying to cope with any of these feelings that I'm going to list off, sad, lonely, or uncomfortable, it can keep you from getting to where you need to go, which is at the core of your feelings and resolving the problem and situation at hand that is happening, right? And what in turn happens when you try to cover that up with food, right? And using that as a coping, that will then distract long term. And that problem is going to fester over periods of time, which then in turn creates a larger problem at hand that we would have or could have originally resolved, right? So if you're finding that when you open your toolbox, right, we're gonna use this analogy, your coping toolbox, when you open the top of that toolbox and there's only one tool in there, one coping tool, and it's labeled food, please start your journey on seeking some professional help and reach out to Kirsten and I, and we can help you get in contact with some resources. And this is where a team of professionals can help you get to a place where you can open your coping toolbox again in a little while and you see lots of tools in there, right? We want to allow, and we're going to talk about this, the choice of choosing how to cope rather than this being our only coping mechanism, and that's eating, right? So please know that if you are one of those individuals that has only just one tool in their toolbox right now, that there is help, there is support, and we can help get you to that. So please reach out to us.
I also want to point out, Brittany, you made the comment just a second ago about how when our only tool is eating food, right, it can cover up some of our other biological sensations. And when we're using food as our only way to cope, it can all of a sudden get really hard to hear our hunger cues or
Mm-hmm.
hear our fullness cues. And we've really focused a lot on those, and those are super important. But if you're finding, right, if we've gotten this far in the class and you're going, I really still have a hard time hearing my hunger cues or hearing my fullness cues, there's a chance that it might be because you're using food to cope, and those emotions are really burying our biological
Mm,
cues, because at the moment, right, our mental health needs taken care of, and our body is prioritizing that, right? We're
mhm,
trying to cope with something, and we're using food to do it, and so our body can't even focus on our normal biological cues. And so, one, I just want to say that's okay, right?
mhm,
We're here to help you maybe look at things from a different perspective, right? Intuitive eating scaffolding that we've talked about so much is here so that you can try and figure out where you're at in your journey. And maybe this is the first time that you're thinking, hey, maybe the reason I have such a hard time knowing when to stop eating is because I'm not eating just because I'm hungry. Maybe I started that way, but now, I listen to the biological cue of hunger, but I'm continuing to eat because my body's now
mhm,
listening to this psychological hunger, right? This
mhm,
emotional hunger. And I don't feel full because, like you said, right, food can't solve our emotional problems. As much as it would be great if we could just take a pill or eat something yummy, right? And that solved our emotional or psychological problems, it doesn't. And so we have to be aware of that, and we have to be aware of what those emotional triggers are.
That's a really, really great point, Kirsten. I love that you brought that up. And I hope that if you are finding yourself in that boat of what Kirsten just described is, hey, how do I know when I'm full? Maybe take a different perspective. Is it because of these emotional triggers or this emotional eating that you're no longer being able to identify, or you haven't been able to identify that biological cue? That, Kirsten, for me, is a very eye-opening moment. I don't know if I've necessarily looked at that like that before. So thank you for bringing that up. Now,
Yeah.
you just mentioned emotional triggers, right? Um,
Yes.
there's so much to unpack, right? And we won't be doing all of it
Mhm.
today, but can you please tell us what emotional triggers are, what they look like, and how pointing them out can support us in this ongoing journey of intuitive eating?
Sure. Like you said, we can't possibly cover this topic and unpack it all in our short
Right.
time here. So we'll give you the TLDR version, right? And the book talks a lot about emotional triggers. So on your first day of class, you also received that emotional triggers handout. It's the one with all the circles on it. And this is a great time to also pull that one out and take a look at that, because there are so many triggers out there that we use food as a way to share or cope with those triggers. So, to remind you of just a few of them, we have boredom and procrastination. This can sometimes look like a bag of chips on your desk, right, when you're working, or a bag of carrots, or for me, it's my bag of true fruit that I could eat the whole bag of, no problem, right? It's that boredom and that procrastination. I'm guilty of this when I'm working. I'm guilty of it on the weekend when my husband is home and the house is clean and the kids are entertained. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I don't know what to do. And so I walk into the kitchen and grab something. Or maybe it's the bribery and reward, right? I think back to that hot chocolate example. That hot chocolate, that was my reward for surviving the morning. And it's still my reward for surviving the morning. Just ask Brittany. Our team meetings every Thursday, I usually have a nice big cup of hot chocolate in my hand. And that's okay, right? But there's also triggers like excitement and self soothing and love, and frustration and anger and rage and stress, right? Think of an emotion, name it. If it's not on the bubble, you can even write it down if that's one that triggers you. But there's so many of these. So are any of these ones resonating with you, Brittany? Or are there any on the sheet that I haven't mentioned that you're like, we need to dig into this one?
Oh, yes. And I think one thing before I air my situations out for everyone to listen to,
We're
um,
here for it.
is that it's easy when we're talking about triggers, when we're talking about coping, it's easy to label these things good or bad, right? It's easy, and as Kirsten was talking about these different emotions, I almost caught myself thinking like, oh, that's a good one, that's a bad one, that's a good one, that's a bad one. It's not that perspective. Again, it's neutral, right? These are all neutral perspectives. We take a look, we step back, and we say, oh gosh, I'm feeling really angry right now. I'm not labeling that emotion as good or bad. It is simply an emotion that I'm feeling. And then again, we move on to, okay, how am I going to cope with that, right? Again, it's all in the choice, all in the perspective when it comes to intuitive eating. Um, so I have my top two emotions that I often find myself needing to figure out how to cope with. And sometimes my other tools in my emotional eating toolbox don't look as appealing as that tool that's labeled eating does. Let's be honest,
Yes.
some of these situations are harder to deal with, and for a second, maybe I want a little bit of a distraction. And I'm going to take
Mhm.
a little snack, That's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just something that I've simply chosen to do. So, like Kirsten mentioned, boredom is one that plagues me as well, right?
Mhm.
It's specifically talked in the book about, and I felt very seen when it was it was talked about. Is um, I'm a person that feels like they always have to fill their time up with something at all times, right?
Yeah.
It's like if I know that I've done X, Y, and Z, but my partner is busy doing something, I feel like I have to be busy doing something too.
Mhm.
It's just one of my traits, and I'm not going to say it's a good or bad trait, but it is one thing that I struggle with. So the moment a tiny bit of an open time, some downtime that needs to be filled, I often fill it with food, right? Because again, still doing something is better than nothing, right?
Mhm.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Um,
I feel you though.
yeah, it's acceptable to eat and it's acceptable to rest, but it doesn't need to be, oh, I have to do, if I'm resting, that means I have to do something, right? And in my brain, that's what goes to it is, okay, well, I'm resting. Well, I'm going to go eat right now.
Yeah.
This is something that with time, being an intuitive eater, it has definitely started to heal with internally for me, right? This psychological and physical situation that I found myself in is this intuitive eating gives power back to me and says, okay, I'm sitting down on the couch right now, but I feel like I need to get up and do something, hence go eat a snack. And I can actually take a second, step back and say, okay, I can allow myself to rest rather than feeling like I have to do one versus the other. Another one,
Yeah.
anxiety and stress, right? I think all of us,
I don't know who could possibly
I
struggle
am
with that one.
not me. um, when we're talking about stress and anxiety and eating food to help soothe, right? That's not but we're not talking about eating. Um, I'm ignoring our body's cues of am I hungry, right? And not feeding. Okay, so let me back up. I'm sorry. Anxiety and stress, I feel like we often talk about we're going to go eat something, right? Um, and then that's how we're going to cope with it. But on the other end of the continuum of feeling like you don't have any control, and that's the one thing you have control over, and you're going to choose not to eat, right? You're choosing not to nourish your body because you're feeling guilty. You're choosing not to go eat that snack because you don't deserve it because of this anxiety or stress that's happening, right? I think it's important to acknowledge both ends of the spectrum here, right? Eating or simply
Yes.
choosing not to eat even though we need to, right? I found myself on both ends of this pendulum, swinging to both ends. Um, But speaking from experience, like what Kirsten had mentioned, neither have resulted in successful coping and benefited me in the long run. So maybe look back on some of your experiences, right? Or where are you swinging on the pendulum? Are you eating, or have you actually done this where I've done this and chosen not to eat because you feel like, oh, well,
Yeah.
I don't deserve it, right? That's something to also take into consideration with intuitive eating. But intuitive eating in this perspective, and not to sound corny, it has been life changing because, again, I am reclaiming that trust. I'm reclaiming that option to choose, right? It's so powerful. Choice is so
Yes.
powerful. And I feel like that's really what this idea of intuitive eating is.
Yeah. And I love that. It's the reclaiming of your power, right? Your power of choice. You don't have to let food control you because now we understand, right? Everyone has triggers and almost everyone uses food to cope with those emotions,
Right.
whether it's in a binge at way or whether it's in a restrictive way or whether it's just eating for eating, right? And it's important that, once again, right, we're reminding you that we are not saying that coping with your emotions with food is bad, right? Once again, let me say that again. We are not saying that coping with your emotions with food is bad, but we are saying it's important for us to recognize our why. Why are we eating and what is happening in our bodies? Intuitive eating is a whole body, whole mind journey and experience, right? Our goal here is to become more in tune and self aware of our bodily sensations that we have ignored or pushed to the side. And this is not only involves hunger and fullness, but it also involves our mental and emotional health. And when we take a step back and when we get curious about why we're grabbing that chip or that cucumber or that slice of bread, we begin to become more in tune with ourselves and lead to a deeper sense of self trust. And so I want to refer once again back to that hot chocolate routine, right? When I really started to get curious about my why of the hot chocolate, and identified it as a way to comfort my very overstimulated self and to reward myself for making it through, I was then able to make a self aware decision on how I wanted to act on those emotions, right? I no longer felt like I had to have the hot chocolate. I suddenly had a choice. So I could choose to drink the hot chocolate or I could choose to go on a walk during nap time, right? I'm lucky that I have a husband that works from home, so I have the option to run away when I need to. And I can choose that. Sometimes I choose the hot chocolate, and sometimes I choose a coping methods. And now, especially that my boys don't nap, I find that when I get outside and I get active during the day, I actually don't crave my hot chocolate as much, right? I'm not needing that form of coping anymore. I can find some other way. I still enjoy my hot chocolate every now and then, usually every Thursday during our team meeting. Everyone has their own thing, but the thing that I want to point out once again is I reclaimed my power of choice. I got to choose how I was going to cope with my emotions because I was able to look back, identify the why I was craving that food, and then decide without any guilt, right? There's no guilt if I drink the hot chocolate. There's no guilt if I go for a walk. Not one is not better than the other. It's just a choice.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that you're bringing that up. Again, you did not, and please re-listen to this part if you didn't catch this, but if you listen to Kirsten experience, she didn't say, oh, well, I was bad and I chose my hot chocolate, right? That is not, that's
Mhm.
called, we're reframing. We're simply stating that this is a coping mechanism or another coping mechanism, right? This isn't a good or
Mhm.
versus bad, which again is so easy to do as we're rejecting the diet mentality and really fighting against that because the way that the diet mentality works, right, is this is good versus this is bad. And we're saying
Right.
It has no place anymore. No power, no place. So I love that. Thank you
Okay.
for.
So, Brittany, my question for you is like you said, we're not labeling this good or bad, but what if I open my toolbox? My only tool in there is food, right? What are some other alternatives? Can you help us with some strategies
Yes.
that give us some extra tools for our toolbox so our listeners don't just feel like here we are listening to Kirsten and Brittany chat telling us not to use food, but not giving us any other ways
Right,
to
right.
also, right? If we don't want to choose food, what else can we choose?
Yes. Okay, my friends. I have some thoughts. And again, what I am saying and what I'm suggesting is not the only things that you can do, but I do want you to take this into consideration. Maybe it helps spark some movement in our minds to think about different coping mechanisms. But I do want to recognize as we ebb and flow, and as our feelings ebb and flow, we go through different seasons of life. Each have their own set of triggers, right? This emotional triggers that we have, we experience different things. And so different things means different coping tools. But here's some tough love before I get into it is important to remember that food does not fix. Okay. This is hard. It does not fix.
Mhm.
Um, and it doesn't provide a solution necessarily to any of these feelings, right? It may comfort for short term, right? It may distract from pain or even numb some really difficult decisions that we don't want to have to choose, but it does not solve the problem. Ultimately, unfortunately, but fortunately, right? You will deal with
Mhm.
some of you'll deal with the source of these emotions, whether it's up front or down the road. And either way, um, if you're starting to identify some of these feelings, pause this recording or later and come up with your own list of alternatives and ways to cope as I go through these different ideas. Just as this whole intuitive eating journey is unique and finding how this practice looks in your life, same goes for coping mechanisms. What works for me may not work for Kirsten or may not work for you, or maybe it does, right? And that's awesome. But please do not feel like you're a circle trying to fit into a square opening, right? This isn't something that you have to force on yourself. Try something different that really works for you. But it is a try again approach, right? So
Yes.
um I find personally for me that mindfulness has immensely helped me cope, right? Um,
Mhm.
but here's some other things. If you're feeling angry, eat something crunchy like nuts, carrots, and celery, right? Bite down on it, crunch it out loud, open your mouth and chew it with an open mouth. You might find some more satisfaction. Maybe don't eat it close to somebody because I think that they might get annoyed, but do it, right? There's a suggestion if you're looking, okay, well, first maybe I want to eat something to help assist in coping. Great, reach for something crunchy and take a look at maybe, um, like I said, nuts, carrots, celery, something really crunchy. Okay, here's another one. If you're still feeling angry, vent to somebody you trust. Get some perspective. This is outside coping tools. Punch a pillow, a punching bag, your bed, curse. Okay, that might be one of my favorite ones. Stomp your feet. Go outside and slam your car door. Express anger in a safe way. Okay, I'm saying these feelings are valid, not good or bad, but let's get it out, but let's do it in a safe way. If you're feeling sad or depressed, maybe you've had a really hard day, fix a smoothie or a yogurt bowl and put some sprinkles on it. Dress it up, right? Or, maybe
Yeah.
have that scoop of ice cream or an ice cream bar, right? Let's not lose touch
I
with
actually,
ourselves. But
yes. And
go
I
ahead.
just learned something, Brittany, when it comes to our food. We have a biological response to color. So we actually feel joyful when we eat something colorful, which
Mhm.
is why, right, like when you think of marketing, um, and the grocery store, our eyes are drawn to those boxes or to those items that are very colorful. So I love this idea of fix yourself a smoothie or a yogurt bowl, right? Because there's usually color, right? It's purple
Mhm.
or it's red or it's pink. So
Mhm.
I just thought I'd share that little tidbit that I just learned, that we have a biological response to color. So if you're wanting to choose food when we're feeling sad or depressed, not only choose something that maybe you normally go for comfort, right? Let's say, be honest, hot chocolate's not very colorful, but maybe pick something that has a bright, vibrant color and spend some time being mindful as you eat it and allowing those colors to also work on our emotions.
I
Anyways,
love
I just
that.
thought I'd share
No,
that.
no, no. That's perfect. Thank you for sharing that. Um, I had two more ideas for you when you're feeling sad and depressed, or you've had a hard day. Is in addition to eating your smoothie bowl, your yogurt bowl, whatever you've put sprinkles on, look at funny videos. Or a baby laughing on Instagram or Facebook. I literally do not know anything that makes me instantly feel better than hearing a baby laugh or some sort of giggle or something. It's just so contagious.
Yes.
Subject yourself to that contagion, right? And then a third idea for this category is watch your favorite warm show or a fuzzy feel good TV show or movie, right? Put your favorite shirt on, put your favorite bottoms on, put your favorite cozy socks on, sit down and watch your favorite show because it's okay. Again, these feelings are okay and they're valid. And sometimes it takes a second to work through them. So allow yourself for that time. Um, Third one I want to talk about is grief, right? Unfortunately, we do
Mhm.
not get throughout this life without feeling grief. Um, and I just want to say, allow yourself to cry, allow yourself to be angry,
Yeah.
allow yourself to ebb and flow throughout all of these emotions because it's going to happen, whether you really fight it and maybe push it off for a while and maybe you use food to distract, but they're going to come up again. Um, so just allow yourself to feel those feelings. When talking about food and dealing with grief, make a dish that reminds you of that individual and share it with a loved one, right?
Oh, I love that.
Is there a specific dish or a specific place that somebody that you're has now passed or that you're feeling grief because maybe um, a breakup or whatever it may be? Allow yourself to enjoy food that tied a good memory to that, right? And share it with people that you love.
Yeah, I
Now,
love that.
Kirsten, I know you've got a few more ideas for our folks. Let's hear them.
Yeah, so we talked about it a little bit earlier with Brittany and I, both anxiety, right? That stress and anxiety is an emotion that everyone has. I talked about the fact that we can go out and move our bodies, right? Sometimes that's an option I do instead of my hot chocolate is I find a way to move, whether that be hiking or climbing or getting out and walking. A lot of times I pair it with my second idea, right, which is getting outside. It's amazing what a little bit of vitamin D can do for us. And so making sure that we're getting outside and nourishing our body in the sunlight. Also, engaging as many senses as possible, right? So sometimes we feel so touched out or we're feeling so anxious, right? That maybe we need to actually not feel any senses, right? Maybe we need to go into a room, turn off the lights, sit there, and just let our senses be blinded. Or maybe sometimes it's the opposite, right? Maybe we need to close our eyes and see what we can hear and see what we can smell and see what we can feel and engage other parts of our senses that maybe don't cause us as much anxiety. And then if we're craving the food, right? If we decide we want to use food, Try cracking shells, right? So eating a pistachio where you actually have to open up the shell and it allows you to pick and crack at something, which can give us something to do with our hands and make us, calm some of that anxiety. Another one for boredom, right? So if we're bored and we're feeling like we just need to be doing something, challenge our mind, right? Find a puzzle or word search or listen to a podcast, maybe on intuitive eating, or
Hello.
learn a, look at what you're doing right now. Or learn a dance to your favorite song, or learn all the words to your favorite song, or to that rap that you would be embarrassed to share with everyone else. That's fine. Learn it, enjoy it, or bake something yummy, right? Go simple or go all out, whatever you want to do. Maybe you want to try that 5-layered cake that you've never had the guts to do it. It's going to take you all day. You won't be bored after that. In fact, you might never want to set foot in your kitchen again because it's 95 degrees outside and you just turned on your oven for 5 hours. So, there's lots of ways that we can fill our time and also help with those emotions. And so think outside of the box. Maybe this spurred some ideas, and I hope you wrote them down. I hope as you heard some of these and maybe had ideas of your own, you wrote them down so that when you're having those emotions, you have a tool that's maybe different than you had before.
And I just want to throw out too, as Kirsten and I have helped brainstorm, right? We're not taking food out of coping, right? As you notice, every different category we listed a way that you can incorporate food in that, right? It's this idea of adding, not subtracting, right? We're not taking it away. Rather, we're adding other additional skills into this to allow for the situation that we found ourselves in. Maybe it's a problem, whatever it may be, that also allows for you to deal with that at the same time as enjoying food too, right? So add to your coping rather than taking this out, right?
Yeah.
I do also want to read a quote for you guys, and I feel like this is a great synopsis. Is food is one way to cope with intense emotions. However, it is essentially the duct tape of coping tools, easy to use and super accessible, but usually only good for a quick fix. As any homeowner knows, duct tape is essential to any toolbox, but is not enough to keep a home intact. I think that really, really drives that home, right? Is we still want this a part of our toolbox, but it can't keep us going in the long run. So
I love
I just,
that.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I love that. I want to reiterate it one more time, right? That coping with food is the duct tape of coping tools, right? I loved how she said that. And I think like we said, there's no morality to it, right? I don't know how many times I've pulled out duct tape to fix, various things, and that's a totally acceptable method, but it's not the long-term fix. But I do also want to point out how in the book, they talk about how emotional eating is both harmful and helpful, right? And I was very grateful for that perspective shift. We live in a world that demonizes emotional eating and tells you that, quote unquote, you should have more self control. And so it's easier to feel hate for yourself when we use food to cope. But I love the perspective that emotional eating has served us, right? And there's ways that you can and should recall when emotional eating served you and recognize it's important, and also recognize the times that it has not served you. It's also important to note that once we get to the point where we can choose those alternate coping methods, right, where we don't need the duct tape necessarily, that our emotions also may become more difficult to ignore, because when we are feeling them deeper and more fully and more honestly when we're not using food to cope, right? And so just be aware that as we choose to not use food, it may bring things to the surface that might need some additional help, right? And Brittany mentioned this earlier. Please, if you're feeling that, if you're recognizing, hey, I have some deeper struggles that I maybe need some professional help with, we have resources that we can help you get to so that you can work through those, because we don't want to just put a band-aid on. We want you to be able to have solutions that will work in the long term, because this is not just about what we're eating, it's also about learning self-trust and self-awareness. And so with that, this is where we want to issue our challenge, right? So this week in the chat, we want you to share some experiences. So first, we are going to give you the Petals of Change worksheet. We'll send it out in an email for you, and we'd like you to work through that. And then second, this is what we want you to share in the chat. So we want you to find a time over the next week where you realize you are eating for an emotional reason. And once again, we're not going to attach morality, right, to this experience. We just want you to stop and recognize when you're eating for an emotional reason, whether that be stress or anger or boredom or any of the other ones that we have listed or maybe have not. And before you start eating, or as soon as you recognize it, right, maybe you're halfway through that emotional meal, we want you to pause. And we want you to grab a piece of paper or pull out your phone or whatever's easiest for you. And we want you to write down two things. So the first thing we want you to write down is the emotion you are feeling and the food you are craving or eating because of that emotion. And then the second thing is we want you to write down one other way that you could cope with that emotion. And then you get to choose, right? With zero guilt attached. You can continue to eat that thing or go and get the food that you're craving, or you can choose whatever that other coping mechanism was that you wrote down. And then I want to ask you to share. Share what you chose and how you felt afterwards. If you continued to eat your food, how did you feel after you finished it? Or if you chose another coping mechanism, how did you feel after you finished with that experience? And please share in the chat. And then once again, I want to reiterate, we're not attaching morality to this. There's no good choice, there's no bad choice. If you choose the food, that's awesome. If you choose the other method, that's awesome. Zero morality. We just want you to understand and see what other options are in your toolkit and what options you prefer. And so that is our challenge to you. And like every week, we'll put this on Teams and we'll put it in our email and send it out to you so that you can see it written out. But this is what we would like you to do for this week. But we do want to also honor your time. We've captured you for a long, hot second, and we're grateful that you sat through and listened all about how we should cope with our emotions with kindness. And we're grateful for you. Hopefully, we offered you some new ideas and some new thoughts, and we look forward to hearing about them in our chat as well as in our class. Let us know if there's any way we can help, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you soon, everyone. Thanks.